I'm Dawn Uricki, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently a postdoc at McGill University. This year, I am also co-chairing the Professional Development Committee with the American Geophysical Union's Hydrology Section Student Subcommittee, or H3S. H3S is a group of motivated students and early career scientists who strive to provide student and early career hydrologists with opportunities for professional development, as well as social interaction and networking within the broader geosciences community. To learn more about H3S and what we do, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter, connect with us on Twitter, and consider joining us for trivia night at AGU Fall Meeting. For more information, please visit our website, www.agu-h3s.org. One of the things we do here at H3S is host this annual Navigating Academic Waters seminar series in partnership with Quasi to assist students and early career researchers in identifying and pursuing their individual career goals. The theme of this year's seminar is Finding Your Niche. In today's seminar, Narrowing Your Professional Path, our aim is to highlight career opportunities outside the academic track. We are thrilled to present a panel of speakers today whose positions might be considered off the beaten path. Today, each panelist will introduce themselves and tell us a little about how they came to be in their current position. After the introductions, we'll open the floor for questions. As a reminder, please share your questions in the Zoom Q&A. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic to our panelists to introduce themselves. For simplicity, let's go in the order they appear on the slide, starting with Rachel Lovell-Ford.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. It's very, very exciting to be here. I was in all of your shoes not that long ago, so I feel very lucky to get to tell you a bit about my journey today. So first off, I'll just say my name is Rachel Lovell-Ford. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the Oregon Water Resources Department, which is a state agency, and we are it's a very interesting organization to work in because we are the managers of water supply here in the state of Oregon. So Dawn asked us to say a little bit in the beginning here about our organization, how we determined our own path in our career and what the steps were that we took to our current position. I'll share certainly about myself here for 4 more minutes or so, but I want to also share a bit about what a few of the other career paths are within our department because it is quite extensive. So I currently sit as a manager of our surface water hydrology section in the Water Resources Department. And our mission is to provide adequate water for in-stream and out-of-stream uses, which for anyone who works in water knows that those are often in conflict in our environment. I think as a state agency, we have a pretty massive, I'll say, kind of certainly legal, but also moral requirement to follow the law and make sure that that law is adhered to. That means, for the most part, that a lot of our work and the work we do is centered around that. I think what I want to make sure comes across in my description of the state agency work today is that more and more state agency work in natural resource regulation generally is requiring more complex analysis and data and information. So even though we are a policy and we're a state agency, we really have and are fundamentally leaning more and more on technical information and to make decisions in policy, which is great as someone who that's what I really went to school for. So let me talk a little bit now about how I ended up here, and I'll share that if you had asked me, of course, 10 years ago, if I would be managing a team of hydrologists at a state agency, I would be like, probably not. That sounds a little crazy. I don't think that's what I'm doing. But looking back now, of course, I see how I got here. And I'd say the 3 major themes of my path were one, just, and it sounds cheesy, but continuing to stay curious and open and learning. The second one was, being willing to take some risks and try things that were a little uncomfortable for myself. And then the third thing was actually taking time to go and do things that really brought me a lot of joy, which generally then led me to the first two things as well. So very quickly, I'll just share that I have a bachelor's in environmental science and a master's in water resources science. And I got into a PhD program and then decided that that was not what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to go start applying the skills I had to work in public service, which was really what called me and what I think my career journey really ended up pointing me towards. Specifically, I had started, my career out in the mid 90s when salmon, Pacific salmon, were listed as an endangered species. And so that was my intro to water, really as a 16 or 17-year-old, managing pumps and restoration projects, right? And seeing that my friend's farm that was right near there, because I grew up in a agricultural area, was going to be pretty impacted by this additional regulation and restriction in this stream. I didn't have that context quite at that point in time, but I saw there was going to be a need for a really strong and good understanding of what salmon needs were for water supplies. And so that kind of was my intro to thinking about water and water management. I then, grew up a little bit more, went to college, and ended up spending about 6 years working for an Indian tribe in Washington State, for the Swinomish Indian tribe, if anyone's familiar with them. That was a fantastic experience, partly because it was a small organization. And so I got to learn everything. I was running basically a field team collecting data for analysis, for regulatory compliance, as well as other needs. But I also got to learn about the grant making process and writing process, and about tribal justice issues that were really environmental justice issues that then again called me back and kind of really awoke in me this public service call that I felt very strongly and still do. And I think for the first time, I realized how my kind of privilege in getting to go to school and get the skills that I had was benefiting, or could be beneficial to a kind of a policy and government setting, and especially in a place there where my job was really to not lead, but to do the work that was requested of me to support, in this case, the establishment of tribal water rights that were in contest with the state there. So that, even though, on paper it looks like a field technician job, it was a really important moment for me in my career. And again, staying curious, taking risks, going and presenting at a tribal meeting where I was representing the tribe because our manager was out sick, and really getting some perspective that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So did that, left, went and hiked the PCT. I'll tell you what, that has gotten me more interviews than anything else I've ever done. People are like, oh my gosh, you're tenacious. We'll hire you. It's great. So go do those things. I interview people all day long. We talk about what we do in a typical day. I'm just interviewing people these days. I'm never going to throw someone out because they took 3 years off to go do something that really spoke to them. So, and then I'll say a little bit of, the world happening around me. 2008 recession hit, moved to Corvallis because my partner was going to grad school. I could get a job only that required a high school degree because of Corvallis, Oregon, and tough market. And it was 2008. So I decided I wanted to go back to grad school, ended up as a contractor for the EPA Research Lab in Corvallis doing what ended up being a really important project for me, which was working on the scientific basis for the intermittent stream determinations for what waters are regulated, what are regulated waters for the federal government. And that was really where I began to see how our science impacted the interpretation of policy, and really got to like see how these, 500 samples I collected and ran, process that summer were going to change what streams were protected or not on the landscape. So went to grad school, ended up working on, got my degree in water resources, so did a lot more hydrology engineering, all of that kind of great stuff. Programming, please don't leave grad school without knowing how to program these days. If you want to work in water, it's just required right now. I'm sure you already know that, but just saying that. And just picked up other skills, designing gauge networks, learning, refining my ability to train and lead a team, working on documentation, all, 4 different processes, things like that. But ultimately, my thesis was on the migration timing for salmonids as it related to the hydrologic regime. And it just so happened that a job opened up as I was on another long distance backpacking trip at the Oregon Water Resources Department to literally build a program for defining ecological flows for storage projects that were going to be funded through a grant program. Got the job, and I've been at WRD now for 10 years, first as a staff scientist, and now managing a team of about what's going to be 25 people. And the last thing I'll share, and then I'll move on, Dawn, thank you, is the thing that I also learned in my starting as a staff scientist and then moving to the manager position, and across all of the teamwork that I had done, is that I actually really like working with people on science. And I actually prefer that to doing the science. That, for my little scientist heart, was like a bit of a blow, right? That was a hard thing for me to accept. But I did it, and I'll tell you what, I am working with my team members on, advanced watershed modeling, basin investigations with the USGS, of running a gauge network of 250 gauges across the state of Oregon, implementing remotely sensed evapotranspiration with, I'll be honest, many of the partners that are organizations that are on the panel today. It's fantastic. I get to really help steer how science impacts, again, policy on the ground. So with that, thank you for your time, and Don, I'll pass it back to you.
I think we can just move on to the next panelist. I see next on my list is C.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. I'm C. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the lead for business analytics at USGS Water. So part of this role is as the lead of the data visualization team. We call ourselves the USGS Biz Lab. We kind of think of ourselves as like the New York Times or Washington Post graphics team of water science in the government. And in addition to that, I'm also a supervisor for data scientists in the data science branch at USGS. And so the goal of the data viz team is to communicate USGS water science and data to the public. We want to make it fun, engaging, and understandable. We're really interested in accessibility, design, and building reproducible data pipelines to support our work and make it more efficient. My path to this role has been pretty varied. This is actually my first job in water. If you asked me 5 years ago what I'd be doing now, I'm not really sure what I'd say. Probably something about living in the rainforest in South America with birds and monkeys. But I think, one of the most important pieces in figuring out my career trajectory has been figuring out what I'm not interested in, and not being afraid to like try new things and learn new skills along the way, and just kind of be adaptable and evolve with my interests. that can be feel a little unstable at times, but I've just never been the type of person that saw, like, oh, I'm going to be this, like, go this academic trajectory, or I see this role for me. I haven't had that much like foresight, and so it's just been kind of like riding it as it goes in some ways. So I'll try and hit on a few points of my path here, and hopefully it's not too winding. I started out as a poli-sci major in undergrad. That was like short-lived. I quickly switched to like environmental science. And then I did this study abroad trip in Costa Rica, where I fell in love with the rainforest, and that motivated me to switch my degrees to primatology and biology. And I was like, I'm going to be the next Jane Goodall type of situation. So my first job after undergrad was working in Argentina following monkeys in the field, and that was awesome. Probably the best time of my life. But from that, I did learn that I didn't love working with monkeys, actually. And every day we did this experiment, and every day was a single data point, and that kind of was like painful, where the data collection was so slow, and I was trying to think of like, how can we get more data, and how can I answer more complex questions, and pursue kind of different research interests that let me do that. So from there, I did a slew of other field-based jobs, mostly in tropical countries, places like Costa Rica, Brazil, and American Samoa. I was really interested in birds and spent a lot of time sitting in blinds, bird banding to take like demographic data, stable isotope data, DNA samples. And one thing that I learned there was like, I was really interested in how birds were kind of navigating in their environment and what led them to do what they were doing, and how did they know like what they could eat and what they couldn't eat. So that thought is what inspired my PhD. I wanted to know, how biodiversity, both like plants and insects, influence what birds ate, and then in turn, what are the ecological and evolutionary implications of, the top-down effects of birds eating insects on those insects and the plants. So I sent that question to a bunch of PIs, and I got a lot of rejections for that. But somebody said yes, and I ended up doing a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology at UC Irvine in Southern California. And it was at this time that I started learning R, and I'll second that previous comment about like programming in grad school is really important. I need to be able to do my own analyses, make figures, and that was a key skill that I picked up. And the more that I learned R, the more powerful I felt, because this gave me a new ability to ask different types of questions. I learned how to leverage large trait databases, incorporate DNA data, phylogenetic relationships, run different simulations that really expanded the reach and topics I could address in my research. So that was kind of like no turning back from there. I continued to build those skills through participating in a bunch of like short courses, hackathons. Did my sound go out? My headphone did something funny. Along the way, I got a certificate in data science from UC Irvine, and just kind of like slowly introducing myself to different things that would expand my skill set in support of my research. And so at that same time, I started publishing papers based on my PhD work. And like after all that time sweating in the field to get every last data point, the last thing I wanted was this like death by PDF where I did all this work, I do all these analyses, I publish it in a journal, and then it just ends there, and nobody ever reads it, right? So I also started making these infographics, and kind of like a passion of mine along the way is like I always thought maybe I should have done graphic design, and so this kind of brought those things together, and I was sharing them out on social media with my papers, and hundreds of people liked them, and so that was like really exciting for me. And these kind of two things, data science and science communication, are really what drove me to my current role. After my PhD, I knew I really loved those two pieces of what I did, and so I was looking for things that took that further. And it was pretty undefined and unclear of what that would be. So I did a postdoc that like let me build that a little bit more. And then I saw this job posting for a data visualization specialist at USGS, and this seemed like the dream job. I didn't know water, but I think a major part of it is bringing in my own background in data science, science communication, helping that translate to other people that maybe also don't know about water. So just leaning into, what I do bring to it rather than what I don't. And my initial role was to make these data viz products to communicate USGS science. In the last year, I've become a supervisor, so that's shifted me a little bit more from the technical work to, guiding the vision of the team and the project work and thinking about how we can build an effective team. That's where I am now. I've been here for about 3.5 years.
All right, I guess I'm taking over. I've loved hearing both from Rachel and C, and I'm starting to sense that there's some themes that we're going to be touching on a lot. Before I get too far into it and I forget, I'm Jill Weinberger. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a principal hydrogeologist at DUDEC, which is a private consulting firm headquartered in Southern California, but with offices throughout the United States. And you'll see my beautiful background picture of Encinitas, California here, which is not quite the view from my office, but if anyone's interested, we're close. So some of the themes that I've been hearing that you'll certainly hear from me as well. Obviously, there's going to be a strong theme on data analysis and technical understanding combined with programming. Those are skill sets that folks in academia bring uniquely to the job setting, and we don't find it from undergrads. We don't find it really even if it's just a coursework master's. It's PhDs that bring that level of skill to the job, and it's very exciting to see that on a resume. I didn't have either of those, right? I have a PhD. I went to Scripps Institution of Oceanography on a whim because I showed up in San Diego and they opened the blinds and I was looking out at the ocean and I was like, well, how could I not come here? And then I got my PhD there, literally, I ended up working with the professor that I worked with because I submitted the wrong application essay. The guy was like, I don't think this is for me. You should talk to this other guy. So I did, and I liked it. And I started working in marine sediments and fluid flow in marine sediments. That's not like a super marketable skill to have. So I was like, all right, I'm all in. I'm going from here. I'm going on a postdoc. I went to Lamont Doherty and I did my postdoc. And it was great. And I loved the people there. And I was still in marine sediments and marine geophysics. But I had a couple of fundamental problems. See, I cannot relate more than to what you said about death by PDF, right? You spend your life, your lifeblood putting these papers together. You send them out there and you realize at AGU that you and 5 other people have read them. And that's the sum of what you got. And they're great people, but maybe you want to have a little bit bigger reach. I was part of a 2-body problem, classic academic problem. I had no control really over where I was going to live. And I mentioned that I really liked that window view of Southern California ocean. So after a lot of soul searching, I reached out to my network of friends from grad school who had not gone into academia, which was not a large group. But one of them happened to have a job at DUDEC, and he literally just put my resume on, at the time, who was going to be my boss's desk and said, you need to talk to her. She doesn't have any of the skills that you actually think you need. She has skills that you don't know that you need yet. And I went in and I interviewed, and he said, I thought this was going to be a courtesy. I didn't think I was going to hire you, but I'm going to give this a shot and see where it goes. And from there, I explored all of the different kinds of things that we do. It's a private consulting company. So we are hired by different people, governmental agencies, some private companies, to do a wide variety of things. So I was in groundwater cleanup for a while. I looked at groundwater resources for a while. And then all of this was happening in the early 2010s in California when we went into an extensive drought, which we may have recovered from briefly, but we're going into another one. I think we all know that. And the California legislature passed a law that was historic in the state called the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And I looked at that and I said, this is where I can have an impact. And so I have been, for the last 6 years or so, assisting municipalities and water agencies and governmental agencies with preparing groundwater sustainability plans and implementing those plans in California. And it has been really fulfilling in a way that I never would have imagined when I was in grad school. I didn't know this job existed when I was in grad school. So kudos to everyone who joined this webinar today to even know to look outside of academia and think about other possibilities. And I'm excited to be here and excited to hear from the other panelists as well.
Thank you so much to the three of you, Rachel, C, and Jill, for sharing your stories. So much of what you said is really relatable and encouraging, and is really good for folks to hear, I think. So we have a few questions that I'd like to pose to you as we sort of wait for audience questions to filter in. And again, I'd like to take a moment to encourage the audience to post your questions in the Q&A and upvote questions that you find compelling so that we can get those out to the panelists and hopefully have them answered for you. So for these next few questions, I'm going to encourage the panelists to keep answers sort of brief so that we can move on to the audience questions as they roll in. And the first question for you is, what does a typical day or a typical week look like in your position or in your organization? And what are you doing and who are you meeting with? Any order?
I'm off of mute, so I'll go first on this. It's a great question, and it's not a question I have a great answer to because there really isn't a typical day for me, which is part of the reason that I actually really enjoy what I do. What I do a lot of is meet with stakeholders and agencies preparing plans. So there's a lot of discussion time, a lot of gathering information, a lot of understanding viewpoints. On top of that, there's supervising my employees who are doing a lot of the data crunching. I have to go to stakeholder meetings offsite fairly often. There's a lot of different facets to it, and every now and then I get to dive into my own little data set and I get to carve out 2 or 3 hours here or there to just do my little analysis of my data, and I love it, and I shut down every other thing around me and I get to do that, and it's fantastic.
I can jump in here. My weeks can be pretty variable, which is something that I think keeps it exciting. But generally, I'm meeting with different science teams to learn about their work, maybe upcoming publications or data sets that we can work with, and helping them to think through what are the key messages to put out there. I'm meeting with the data viz team and other people I supervise to help them think through their approach or solving different problems, making connections with other people in the organization. And then I'm doing things like coding websites, making animations, building reproducible pipelines, and contributing to social media efforts. I work mostly in R and JavaScript, and maybe do a little bit of illustration.
I'll wrap up by saying that I think one unique feature of working for state government, especially, and this may be true of more local government as well, is that our hours per week are pretty tightly controlled by our union if you're a staff member. So you will not work more than 40 hours a week unless your supervisor approves it, much to the chagrin of many projects. Huge benefit to some people for work-life balance, and for other people, I know that can be quite frustrating, but wanted to share that. I, as a manager, am spending most of my time meeting with my team, working on strategic planning, helping people with sticky problems, reviewing work of other people. I would say that our technical staff are spending about 80% of their time doing the technical work. And then I think the last thing I wanted to add is that the state government may be true for you as well, C, but I know for state government, our work is very seasonal as it relates to the legislative process. So in Oregon, we have a biennial process, and Jill, you're nodding because I know your work is impacted by this as well. But you know, in the legislative season, as a manager, I'm spending, we're a relatively small agency of about 250 people. So I am one of the people responding to legislative requests, presenting at the legislature, doing that body of work, and that can be significant. during session. When we're out of session, I get to focus more on all of the other good stuff. And a little bit of field work still. Yeah.
Thanks, that's great. So Rachel kind of touched on this, and I'm hoping to hear from all three of you on this one too. So from your experience, what would you say are some of the major differences between your organization and other sectors? So such as academia or nonprofit, government, industry, what sort of sets your sector apart? And then as a follow-up, sort of what's similar?
Since I started talking about the hours, I'll keep going on that thread. So I had written down probably about 4 things. So I think a benefit generally for state agency work is that funding is stable. So our programs and staff are funded out of general fund. That typically doesn't change. Our agency prioritizes retaining staff when budgets are cut. So I'll probably always have a job, but I may not always have money to have contracts and do cool work. So I'll say the benefits, if you are also looking for, have medical or other needs in your family, incredible. I pay about $15 a month for insurance for my entire family, which is pretty awesome and really good insurance. I would say the other major kind of unique benefit or characteristic of working for the state is that you get to be in the room really steering how policy is implemented. So, other groups that we work with and contract with, like Jill's team, we rely on contractors for work that we don't have capacity to do, or for expertise and guidance on where to proceed. But the conversation around how that actually turns into law or policy, it really does happen with a state agency, which is if you want to be a part of like really helping science steer our legal system, this is a good place to do it. I'll just say, I think one of the major, working for government, you're probably not going to be doing a lot of novel research. You might be supporting others in that, but that's just not where it happens. You will be applying that and working in partnership with the GS, with consultant groups, with other federal agencies, with research consortiums on developing and testing, but not on, we don't have, say, a research fund to go do your own work. And I'll just add that we're behind, right? We're not at the cutting edge. We want to see that things have been tested and work. So if what you're really drawn to is working on the edge and discovery, this is probably not a good career for you. But so there's honest pros and cons.
I was going to say a couple of similar things because I'm also in the government. It can be very slow moving. I think one thing that's pretty cool about USGS in particular, though, is like there's this huge depth of like technical expertise and staff. We have everything from, front end, back end developers, usability specialists, communication specialists, cartographers, like a huge number of different types of researchers, machine learning experts, data engineers. And so it's really exciting to be able to like work with all these different people in their areas and have kind of this built-in community that can support all aspects of a project, and just a huge diversity of projects, often that are at this like really big national scale, which can be exciting. There's also downsides to that too. And so I find it to be extremely collaborative. On any given day, there's like 3 to 4 people contributing to the same code repo for a single chart that we might be working on, or the same analysis. And that was definitely a switch from my previous academic experiences. Salary-wise, we're not going to be as competitive as industry for data scientists. But we do have this unique intersection of like tech and science and government that can be appealing to some for a lot of the same reasons that were just said. You know, there's like a really good work-life balance. Nobody wants you to work more than 40 hours a week. You have stable jobs with great benefits. And my group also allows for remote work and a flexible work schedule, which is awesome.
Yeah, and I see in some of the questions coming in about things like work schedule, and I think in industry it really varies. So my experience at Dudek, which is a smaller consulting firm, is that we have quite a bit of flexibility, and we do bridge a little bit between the really research intensive academic focus and government, right? So we kind of sit in between, in a way, I think in some ways that the USGS often does as well, even though you're part of the government, you have that very intense research focus. So we get hired, as Rachel mentioned, we get hired by state agencies or municipalities or others to actually bring the research that needs to be done to them. Now it's very focused, right? So similar to academia, you're writing a proposal, and it's a proposal to do work that you know that this agency needs from you. You're putting a budget together to do that work. You are sticking to that budget, and nobody likes to go back and say, hey, I ran out of money, can I have some more, and not have a work product that's ready to give somebody. So there are a lot of similarities there. I mean, in academia, you report to NSF on your budgets and how you're doing, and you got to get a work product to them as well. But there's a difference, from my perspective, a difference in the time scale of projects. So the projects that I work on are, you know, a year to 2 years, sometimes as much as 5 years long, but then they end. And you're looking to build on that and move to other areas that are going to need your expertise, and trying to navigate what the next project is going to look like, and who's going to need it from you. There's also not the pressure of, you got to get everything done before you're 35, because if you haven't done it, then you're not going to get tenure, right? This is a far more paced experience. There are times during the year that Rachel and C have touched on, times during the year that are very busy, and there are times that are not as busy. You can take 2 weeks of vacation and just go away for 2 weeks. And then to the question on, you know, actual working hours, like I said, for me, it's pretty flexible. I actually chose to work 32 hours a week a long time ago when I had kids, and I've never been pressured to come back to do more than that. So I've hung on to that work schedule, and I can get those 32 hours completed within the week, and that's fine. Obviously, I need to be here sometimes to talk to people. Other people are working during normal working hours, but if I show up at 10 and stay until 4 one day, I can come the next day and work a little longer, or I can shift it later in the day to volunteer at my kid's school. So I enjoy the flexibility.
Thank you. This has been really illuminating, getting sort of a glimpse into all of your organizations. So we have some audience questions coming in, and this next one is for C. Thanks for sharing your path. As students and early career researchers with experience in water and potentially programming already, how can we improve our skills in infographic making or data visualization? C?
Yeah, I think, you know, my advice, especially if you're interested in the data viz communication side of it and building the skills to do that, like coming up with a concept from a data set and executing it from like beginning to completion, and kind of doing it iteratively to get feedback and thinking along the way. I think to pick up the needed skills to really execute a project, I find it's most valuable to like have an end goal in mind and push yourself to see it all the way through, because that makes you address the challenges along the way and figure out those little bugs that you could have like just skipped over if you were just following maybe like a code vignette or like a tutorial, where you wouldn't have to do that. I think also, as far as like building skills, working with what you already have, there's already there's a need for, you know, expertise at all levels. And so like taking what you have and then just incrementally building from there, like what will complement it and take it a little bit further, and how can you add on to that? Like it's not necessary to like jump into the deep end, you know, like all at once, but just kind of leveraging where you're at and continuing to grow, and creating like a portfolio that represents the breadth of what you can do is also pretty valuable. Or even something like having a GitHub account where you can document what you've been working on.
Awesome, thank you. This next question is for Jill. You sort of talked about carving out your time for a few hours of research. This next question says, as a person with a PhD education working in consulting, does your job include conducting research? And if so, how much of your job includes research?
It's a great question. And the answer is less so these days than it used to. So when I started at DUDAC, I was fortunate enough to be involved in a project that was looking at overall hydrologic resources of a large private ranch. And so we were installing stream gauges, we were drilling wells, we were looking at sap flow in trees, and I got to do all of that. And I would say that, and then I got to come back and analyze the data. And at that time, so for the first maybe 4 years of my career at DUDAC, I would say it was probably 25% time on that project, and that was research oriented. As I've progressed, I have not been as fortunate to be the one analyzing the data, but I am the one designing the research studies, right? And helping the folks that work for me to go out and do the field work and do it. And that's just a factor of billing rates. As you move in an organization, you are billed at a higher rate, and nobody wants to pay me to go sit a drill rig anymore, which makes me sad. But there is it, and I will also say, like I said, DUDAC is sort of there are others that are similar in size to DUDAC, and I think if you find the right size and the right consulting firm with an interest in other academics that have been hired there, you'll find those kinds of projects. Not every consulting firm is that way, and particularly the really large ones tend to have very rigid protocols of, these are the projects we do, this is how we do them. As a first year person, you're going to do this, this, and this, and we're only going to look at how much time you've built the projects. And so you want to, if you're interested in maintaining a little bit more of that balance, you want to ask questions of the firm that you are interviewing with, of, do you have other PhDs? Can I talk to them so I can get a sense of what they do, and go through that process and be very open with them about what your interests are.
Thank you. This next question is for Rachel. Audience member says, hopefully I didn't miss this. How did you find yourself in your current position? Was this a position you saw a posting about and interviewed for specifically, or did it emerge with your skill set?
Thanks, great question. And I don't think you did miss it. So I'll share. So I've been with the Water Resources Department for 10 years. I spent 3 years as a staff hydrologist, just doing, basically running studies for different projects we were working on, mostly programming in R for that work. And then from that point, I moved into, I would say, that was when I really started realizing I wanted to maybe work more with people instead of just on doing the scientific work. So I moved into a position with our planning section as a coordinating scientist, and so was working across our whole agency. And then, we're human beings, and I basically began to build a lot of relationships across our agency and across our kind of sister agencies around the kind of work that we do, started working on more strategic planning stuff, took opportunities to be a part of those conversations. And so when a job opened up internally for a management position, I was pretty well poised to move into it, especially because I'd been telling our deputy director for 3 years at that point that I wanted this job and that I, had a vision for what it would look like. So that is something I'll say about state government. And I actually don't know if this is true for the feds, but our union is quite strong, and we have laws that require us to really look internally for candidates for promotion before we go externally. So there is a benefit in state, at least in the state of Oregon, for getting in maybe at a lower level than you want to start at, but you'll get to know people. We also have procedures for having fair interview processes, so we're not nepotism is real, and we try to confront that. But also, if you're in the door, you got a better shot at getting promoted per our contract.
Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah.
This next question is for Jill, and I'm going to mention again, we're kind of coming down to the end of the seminar, so I'm going to encourage you again to keep our answers brief so that we can get to more audience questions in the time we have left. So this person says, I'm currently in an MS program and I hope to end up in an academic adjacent role, curator of some kind of scientific archive. Shout out to the LDCR, Jill. I do plan on getting a PhD someday, but I'm not sure how much that would limit options outside of academic roles if my plan doesn't work out. Can you explain if you ever felt pigeonholed by your advanced degrees or your lack thereof? And actually, I think this question could be for anyone.
Yeah, I think this is for all of us. I personally was very concerned about this very question when I left academia, and I did not actually find it to be a concern when I started interviewing. So I think that in my personal experience, that is a remnant of a model from 50 years ago when they're like, and you've got a PhD, you're just qualified for academia. I think the more of us that are out there in the workplace, the more they're like, yes, please, I would like some more of that.
Yeah, I would say, like pigeonholed, no, I don't need a PhD to do what I do now though either. But it does add a lot of value. The things that I learned along the way, it's in a different field, but it taught me about the scientific process and problem solving, critical thinking, and I use those things every single day.
I am always excited to see that somebody has a PhD on their resume. I'm never bummed out about that.
Okay, thank you. So this next question is one of the ones I kind of sent you beforehand. So besides coding, we've talked a lot about coding and technical skills, but what would you say are some of the other more important skills and attributes that someone would need to be successful in a position or organization like yours? And how might you identify those skills in a job candidate? Jill, you can go ahead.
I can give it a quick go. Aside from the very, the technical skills and the coding, 3 things come to mind for me. One is public speaking. Don't discount all of the public speaking that you've done at AGU or other places. It's really helpful to be able to run a meeting, and it's really helpful to be able to explain things to non-technical experts. So public speaking is great. Writing is actually really important for us. And we, in fact, will often administer a quick writing request, not necessarily just from something that you have had a lot of time to work on, but hey, could you, write me an email explaining this in the next hour, and just see what comes in. And then the last thing is, I think we've already touched on it, intellectual curiosity. Right? If you're open to asking questions and learning new things, that's all we can ask for.
I'll add or echo everything Jill said. We consider that in our interview process. I'm going to add in a demonstration of an ability to work with a team. If you have never worked with a team, that's going to be that will likely impact your score in an interview process quite significantly. And then I'll kind of along those same lines, this interpersonal skills, just honestly like self-awareness around how you deal with stress and conflict, and that comes through in your interview. So if you haven't taken some time to get feedback from other people on how you handle somebody telling you you're wrong or they don't like what you did, or please go take the time to do that. It's a real skill and it really matters.
I really couldn't agree more with what was just said by both of them. We're looking for people that are highly collaborative, open to learning, and they're going to be flexible. It's important to understand what you bring to the table, but also when you should bring others in and what the limits of your own knowledge are. So in interviews, we're asking questions about how you interact with others and work in a team, and trying to assess like emotional intelligence and self-awareness, like was just mentioned.
Great, thank you for those answers. There was some surprising things to hear in there. I appreciate all of you sharing. So we're coming up nearing the end of the hour here. Unfortunately, we're out of time for questions, so we're going to leave it at that. I would encourage folks to bring any remaining questions to the working session that we have. If you're interested in any of these organizations, feel free to reach out to these folks or look up their websites and their organizations online. At this time, I would like to thank our panelists and audience for joining us today and engaging in this terrific and encouraging discussion. I would also like to thank Quasi for hosting the seminar series. I'd like to thank Debashish Mishra and the H3S Professional Development Committee, who have been working very hard to develop this year's seminar series. I hope you've enjoyed today's session, and I look forward to seeing you next week at our co-working session, where you will have the opportunity to start narrowing your professional path. If you haven't already, please also register for the other 2 seminars in this series, the what, why, and how of building your personal research brand in October, and developing effective mentoring relationships in November. Hope to see you soon.